Mooch, welcome to Locked In. Shout out to Sos the Ghost for making this happen and flying you out here today. And a big shout out to Ric Flair and Woo Energy. You just tried, the pineapple one?
Yeah, it's delicious. I'll be sipping it throughout the show.
Yeah, well, take some for the road, too. Those things are so good.
Yeah, they're awesome.
It's crazy. And I love how they have a diverse range of flavors. You're going to have to try some of the other flavors. But hope you had a safe flight. And, you're here, so you had a safe flight.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
I was just thinking today was they had those outages, so your flight didn't get affected by that?
I hope my flight home isn't. Last night there was a lot of from thunderstorms in Atlanta. There was a lot of delays, so I had 2 delays coming out here. I didn't get in until 2 in the morning.
Holy cow! Were you in a hotel?
Yeah.
Okay. When do you fly out, today or tomorrow?
7 a.m. tomorrow.
Oof. Yeah. Out of Hartford. Did you stay in Hartford for the airport?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And it was a $100 Uber ride to get out here. And
holy cow! Well, we'll reimburse you for the Uber ride.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
man.
I'll take care of that for
Appreciate it.
Yeah. But yeah, the whole I woke up this morning to all the news for the outage on what's it called? Microsoft, I guess,
that,
crashed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't even think of it. I was like, oh, he's flying in. He might have problems.
Yeah, that's my luck. Thankfully, I missed it, man. I mean, hopefully it doesn't affect my ride home. I've been trying to check into my flight, and I haven't been able to, so I wonder if that's why.
Oh, yeah. What airline?
Delta.
Okay, yeah, I've been using Delta, but I've been having the worst travel luck lately.
Oh, man, I feel like ever since COVID, traveling's been brutal.
It really is.
Flights are longer. Things are delayed all the time. They oversell flights. I mean, everything's just been rough, I think, since COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did you grow up? It wasn't Georgia, right?
Right, yeah. No, I grew up in Salem, Oregon. It's about an hour outside of Portland. Then after high school, I moved to Portland, lived there for most of my life. And then in 2017, lived in San Diego, Southern California for a while. I did my undergraduate at Whittier College, so I spent like a year and a half in East Los Angeles. And then in 2017, I moved to Southern Illinois, right outside of St. Louis. And then just recently, I moved to Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, wow. So Oregon, not a lot of guests come on the show from there. I mean, we had JD DeLay, who we were talking about, and maybe one or two, but it's so far out there.
Yeah.
What was that like growing up there?
Man, Oregon was cool. I think it's, everyone hears about Portland and they see all the stuff in the news, and I think that's a different city than it was when I grew up. It's pretty cool. It's an hour to the beach, an hour to the mountains. It's one of the most beautiful states you can be in. It rains a lot, and I think, living there for a long time, that gets a little tough. But I loved it, man. I really enjoyed it. I have an identical twin brother, and most of my family lives there, so I get back and visit quite a bit.
So you guys look exactly alike?
Yeah, pretty much.
Born at the same time?
Yep, 7 minutes apart.
Holy cow. Do you guys have the same personality?
No, not really. But I mean, we've done all the same stuff. Like when I got into the punk rock and skinhead scene, he did. When I got into the biker scene, he did. And we both have a ton of tattoos, just not the same ones, but, a lot of his, like, similar spots and stuff.
Yeah. Did it hurt, the neck and the scalp? I was talking to someone recently that said this was the most painful part.
The head was brutal, man. The head was brutal. My throat, I was really nervous about it, and it wasn't, it sucked. All tattoos, I think, hurt. But the hardest part about throat was they're, pushing on it and, the stretching the skin and all that. That sucked. The side of my neck hurt, but the head was brutal, dude.
Yeah, I thought this would be the worst.
Yes, I thought it would be too, and it wasn't too bad. The side, I think, was worse than the middle.
Everyone said that this would hurt, but it didn't hurt for me at all.
Yeah.
Most painful was the wrist and the elbow. Was
elbow
brutal.
sucks, or the ditch, the inside of the elbow. How was that for you?
No, this was fine.
Weird. I didn't like the healing of that, because it was cracking.
Yes, the healing. I think he had my arm like this, so it fell asleep. So it didn't hurt at all the way I was laying on the table.
Yeah. I started getting tattooed. I was 16. I'm 43 now. So it's been a long time. And I used to be able to sit, for hours. And now it's like hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm good, dog. I'm good. Let's move on.
Yeah. Were you and your brother really close growing up? Was that your best friend type of person? Yeah.
We're the type of twins. We don't say I love you or hug each other, but we've done everything together, and it's like family trips. I always had a homeboy with me. And, we're really close. And we've done a lot of cool things together.
What did your parents do?
My whole family's pretty much school teachers. So, my biological father was in prison most of my life. So my stepdad, he owned a franchise of 7-Up bottling company. So he's an engineer. So he built bottling lines. So he was in a factory all the time. And then my mom was a special education teacher. And then my grandparents were both high school teachers. And then most of my family's either teachers or sports coaches. So
would you say you guys grew up not really wanting for anything, impoverished at all?
Yeah, no, things were pretty good, man. We were a middle-class family. I'm an Italian background, so every Sunday was family dinners and every holiday and birthdays and, big family stuff. So, I had a really good family upbringing. I'd say, middle class, kind of working class because it was all teachers and stuff. But yeah, we were treated well. We definitely came up well.
You look like you have like an Italian mustache.
Yeah, this is new. I've never had a mustache before, man. This is new for me.
Oh, why the change of heart?
I don't know. I turned 43 and I said, this is going to be the month of the mustache, and I still have it.
Well, they say mustaches are in.
Yeah.
That's what everyone's saying.
My wife hates it, so.
Well, I'm sure the audience is going to love it.
Yeah, we'll see what they say.
They got to appreciate a good mustache.
I'm Italian, right? I got to have one.
That's so cool. I didn't even realize you were Italian. My mom's side of the family is Italian.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we grew up doing all that, the big family dinners and the meals and,
awesome,
the pasta dishes when you go over the relatives and whatnot.
And you notice, too, like Italians have to give you something whenever you visit. So you can't leave without leftovers or, little stuff. But every time you go visit somebody Italian, they're like, take this with you, or you got enough of this, or hey, try this drink, take this wine with you, whatever. But yeah, no, I'm lucky. I grew up like that. Most of my family immigrated from Italy to New Jersey, great-grandparents. But then a lot of my family's either in New Jersey and then eventually out to Oregon. So it's kind of split between the two.
Awesome. And how would people describe you if we had, say, like your closest friend, or even we'll say your identical brother, if he was here with us today? How would he describe you growing up?
Man, it's funny, like, me versus now versus then probably. But I've always been a natural storyteller. I'm outgoing. I like to make friends. I've been a networker like my whole life. And then I've just really worked hard for everything I've liked. I grew up playing sports, and a lot of that, wrestling was a big for me. So a lot of that taught me like, hey, if you want to get good at something, you got to put in the work and you got to put in the effort. Like no one's going to do it for you. And so I was 18 or 19, I started a band and ended up like, managing it and promoting all the tours, and just pre-internet. So like, you couldn't just put a single out. You had to tour. So we spent 5 years on the road. I was booking tours. We were touring. We did, we played CBGB's and Gilman Street and like all the cool punk venues. And we did a Canadian tour. I had a felony at the time, so I took my twin brother's ID to get into to Canada. But yeah, so, I just always really worked hard at what I did, and, been pretty lucky. I've been pretty successful at that stuff. I would say one character trait about me is I'm a good networker, not good at making money. So for whatever reason, I've never like been that interested in like the hustle. Like I'd rather meet people and have experiences than have money. So
yeah, see, like I was a great like entrepreneurial type networker, but I couldn't make money. Like I was good at putting everything together, like the events, but they were, on a business standpoint, they were terrible. I'd learned later on as I got older and doing things, but back then I feel you exactly what you're talking about.
And I've always been that guy that knows a guy, right? So I feel like I'm like the yellow pages. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you need something done? I got a guy for that. So, you can't really profit off that. I can hook people up, or I got my friends that can do it for another friend. So it's a great skill, but it wasn't something that had a big monetary value.
Did that networking ability help you and translate over when you would get into motorcycle clubs and whatnot? Does that help that trait? Yeah,
huge. So, I started 2015, 2005, I bought my first Harley, and I joined a club in shortly thereafter. And then I joined the Mongols in 2007. And because of all that networking and stuff, I built not only a good support network, but a lot of chapters. Like I started most of the chapters in Oregon and Washington. I moved to the Midwest. I started like 4 different states. I started chapters there. I helped start the Australian chapter of the Mongols, and that was all through connections and networking and people I'd stayed in touch with over the years. Some from touring and, some from just people I meet on the road or whatever.
So when you start a chapter, does that make you like the head of that group, or how does that work? Yeah,
it kind of depends. So like in Portland, or the first chapter we started in Eugene was in Eugene, Oregon, 2007. And everyone the positions are elected. So I was elected president. But yeah, if you're the active, outgoing guy that's like putting it together and bringing the guys in, probably a good chance that you're going to get elected the president, right? But in other areas, like so when I moved to Illinois, there was one chapter in Kansas City, had like 2 members left and nobody else in Missouri. When I left, we had a full chapter in Kansas City, Lake of the Ozarks, St. Louis. So three big chapters there, but I didn't live in those areas, so I wasn't like in charge of them really. I just helped them get up, helped them get going, answer questions, kind of mentor, but I wasn't like in a leadership position within those chapters.
Now, that role that you took on creating these chapters, is that something you wanted to do when you first joined, or did that kind of fall into your lap?
It just happened, man. Like, so when I decided I wanted to join the Mongols, there was no Mongol chapters in Oregon. And so they told me, I kind of came in at this like, just at the right place, right time type of thing. Like normally, if there's no chapter in your state, you're not going to be in that club, right? I came in under Doc Cavazos, who kind of was on this big recruitment drive, and he was bringing people in. And I was in another club called the Vagos, and a lot of the time you couldn't go from Vagos to Mongols. They had an agreement. But again, it's the right place, right time, where they weren't honoring that agreement. They were bringing people in. So no, man, my initial goal was just, hey, let's just start this chapter, and I want to be a Mongol, and I'm happy. And then, things just kind of grew from there. I started the first chapter in Oregon, and no one wants to ride around with their 5 friends forever, right? So I tried to start another chapter, and then I moved up to Portland, and I figured, hey, if I live here, I'm going to start a chapter. So a lot of it went to like either where I lived or where I knew people. Like Spokane, Washington, there's a group of guys from a crew called FSU that I knew from the punk rock scene, and they were riding and wanting to hang out. And so I was like, well, hey, we're all family already. Might as well join my family officially, and I'd bring them in. Or I did that with Virginia Beach. And Australia, for example, they were in another club called the Finks. But we had built this really good relationship on social media. We've been talking a lot. And when they decided they wanted to leave the Finks, well, they were like, hey, we already have this connection with Mooch. And so just that networking piece, it played a big role.
Hey everyone, it's Ian, and I hope you're enjoying this podcast of Locked In, because I know I am. But before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about HelloFresh, which, if you've been following me on Instagram or Snapchat, you know I am literally obsessed with it and have been cooking HelloFresh meals every night. And let's be real for a second. Home-cooked meals are the best, but who's got time for all that planning, shopping, and prep? That's where HelloFresh comes in, making dinner easier and stress-free. They handle the meal planning and deliver pre-portioned fresh ingredients right to your door, so no more searching for recipes or buying a whole jar of spices for just one pinch. With 50 new recipes to pick from each week, you'll never get bored. Whether you're into fit and wholesome, quick and easy, vegetarian, or family-friendly options, HelloFresh has something for everyone. Plus, if your plans change, you can easily skip a week or switch up your delivery. They've got you covered. So if you're ready to save time, money, and avoid those long grocery lines, especially with the holiday season coming up, HelloFresh is your go-to each week. And guys, I'm not just shoving something down your throats that I don't even use myself. I spend my own money to order HelloFresh, and I absolutely love cooking the meals at home every night. The portions are generous, and the recipes are super easy to follow, so it's really never a hassle. Every week there's a new selection of exciting dishes to choose from, and I can create meals that are even better than what you'd get at a restaurant for a fraction of the price. We all like to save money, so give HelloFresh a try. It's a win all around. So for free breakfast for life, go to HelloFresh.com/freelocked. One free breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/freelocked. Big thanks to America's #1 meal kit for sponsoring this episode. Now let's get back into it with Mooch. Now the Mongols are a pretty notorious motorcycle club. I think there's a big stereotype. Like when I was growing up, you think of biker clubs, and people always get mad at me because I call them biker gangs, but that's just how I was raised.
Right.
I'm this white nerdy kid, but they think it's just like violent, criminal, that. But when you meet someone like you, you're not that. You're a therapist. You have a book written. What do you think are why these misconceptions are? And I don't think you joined the Mongols to be like some tough biker type dude.
Right. Yeah, I think, a lot of it is those old stereotypes, like the early Hells Angels, right? Like the stuff we'd see on, your parents heard about it and the stuff we'd see on TV. And yeah, some of them were doing some illegal stuff, right? I think the way the media portrays it too plays a big role. But I think in reality, if you're guys like us join stuff, man, you know what I mean? Whether it was prison or street gangs or whatever, we find like-minded people generally. That's human nature. And I'm riding motorcycles. I grew up in that punk rock skinhead scene, so I'd already had that sense for community and family. And so I was drawn to that lifestyle. And I think that, that's common for a lot of people. And I think also now, motorcycle clubs are in popular media now too, right? There's movies and TV shows. And so I think that attracts a certain type of people too. But what I didn't know, and to go back to your point, is when I was in the Mongols, one of the things that got me to go back to school is I met a guy that had his PhD in clinical psychology, and he was a Mongol from the Hollywood chapter. And I was like, well, if he could do it, I can do that, Trying to think, hey, what can I do as a felon with all these, all these visible tattoos? And this guy was more tattooed than me, and he was a doctor, And so I met a lot of people like that in club life, in all the different clubs. And I started seeing that, this is something that people are doing for fun, but obviously it's a lifestyle, right? So it's not just like a hobby, but they also have careers and families and all the same thing everyone else in life has, but people just ignore that or don't recognize that, I think.
And I think they, that you touched on the tattoos, they do associate the tattoos with the felony. Then you mix that in with being a part of a pretty notorious club, and people form an opinion. Yeah,
and you know what? I've always been that guy that I like challenging those opinions. Like, even when I was in Mongol leadership, I knew everyone, you walk into a bar and people would be scared, but I wanted to be, when we left, they'd go, man, those Mongols were awesome. Like, I wouldn't mess with them, but man, they were all nice, polite. Like, I always wanted to be welcome back where I went. And people, sometimes I think miss the big picture. How long, like, again, networking, right? How long it could help you to meet these people, be cool, have good relationships, because who knows who's going to sit on your jury one day, or who maybe even broken down on the side of the road and someone drives by and can give you a hand. But that's all built off connections and how you act in public, And so I really like challenging that stereotype. Like, hey, dude, they were all smiling and cool and they were all really polite, versus that puffy chested, like, do you know who you're messing with crap that, I don't really put up with.
Yeah. So you said you were touring with the band for a few years. Did you put college on hold or skip college completely at that time period to do that?
Yeah. So I started the band, I think I was 19. Man, I barely finished high school. I had no aspirations. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I got my felony in 1999, a month after my 18th birthday. And so that already closed a lot of doors for me. I thought growing up I probably wanted to be a teacher, since that's what most of my family was. But with a felony, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. And so I kind of jumped headfirst in the music scene. And I was like, well, hey, I'm just going to play punk rock. Whatever, I'll figure it out. So I spent 5 years doing that. And then I got into motorcycle clubs. And those first couple years, motorcycle clubs, I was just in and out of jail a lot. Over 2 years, I did almost 2 years in county, like off and on, like a month, 2 months here, off, month, back and forth. And at one point I walked out of jail and I'm like, man, I don't like this revolving door. I need to do something. And that's when I met Richie Rich. He was a PhD in clinical psychology for the Mongols. He was doing drug and alcohol counseling. And I was like, well, man, if he could do that, at least drug and alcohol counseling is something I could probably do as a felon. So I started going to school for that. I was 29. Yeah, I was 36 when I finally graduated with a master's degree. So I was about 28 when I started going to school. And then, I just kept going. I started with that drug and alcohol counseling and fell in love with psychology. And then I ended up getting a master's degree in social work.
When you were in and out of jail, were you still a part of the Mongols?
Yeah. So I had this big charge in 2000. So I started the Mongols 2007. A few months later, 2008, I'm following this car that's trespassing my property, all blacked out SUV. Assume it's the enemy. And they wanted me to think so. They even went to this other club's clubhouse and parked out front. And so I followed him for close to an hour. And at one point, they wouldn't let me get next to him. So at one point, I'd called ahead and we were all in cars. And we tried to box this car in and pull it over. Well, it was an ATF agent and a local police detective. So again, I didn't think I did anything wrong. I followed somebody. But they hit me with attempted kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, on federal agents. I had a $14 million bail and they reduced it to 1.4. But I fought the whole thing from court, from jail, because I wasn't going to get bonded out on that. And I got found not guilty in trial. I took all the way to trial, but I did get found guilty of reckless driving and menacing, misdemeanors. But they gave me felony gang probation, and part of it was I couldn't affiliate with the Mongols, including my twin brother. And me being the guy I am, I kept just living life like I normally would, and I got caught numerous times because we had some informants in the chapter, which I didn't know out at the time, and so they were telling on me. So every time I got caught, I'd go back for a month or two at a time.
Wait, so you took the feds to trial?
Yeah, I won, dude.
I did too. I didn't win, but I won half the counts, but I still went to jail. But that's incredible that you actually went to a federal trial.
Mine ended up being state charges, so it was against a federal agent, but it was a state charge.
Okay. And it's interesting you bring this up because I don't know if you've heard of Johnny Mitchell. He's a very big in the prison space, big YouTuber. He just interviewed one of those undercover agents that was undercover for the Hells Angels. And I helped him with his clips. So one of the clips was that they took a Mongol's vest.
Yeah, Jay Dobbins story.
Yeah, and then they pretended it was do you know who this agent is?
Yeah, Jay Dobbins.
Okay.
Yeah. They pretended to kill a Mongol so he could try and join the Hells Angels.
Do you know about all that? Was that during your time period?
That was before my time period. I've read like every book there is about motorcycles and motorcycle stuff, and I've seen him on podcasts and stuff. But man, it's crazy the longer I was in. So I was in during Operation Black Rain, which concluded in 2008, which was when four ATF agents infiltrated the Mongols. 3 of them became full patch members. And dozens of informants, and it was this huge. I think it was the biggest national bust of motorcycle clubs ever. And it was, in fact, it was a case that just ended last year because at one of it they tried to forfeit try to legally take the club's patch in a civil forfeiture. And of course, that went up the ladder to, Supreme Court and stuff like that. So it was the whole time I was in the club, we were fighting this case. But I saw firsthand like what these undercover agents would do, and it was just absolutely insane, dude. Insane. Because like when I first started the Mongols, I knew like, man, maybe I'd get arrested for a bar fight or some. Back then, I didn't even party or anything. But some of the guys, maybe some recreational drug use. But I knew we weren't doing illegal stuff, and I didn't know what informants were. I was naive. I was a 25-year-old kid coming from punk rock, so I'd think, oh, undercovers because we'd see that stuff on TV. But the guys that were informants in my chapter were drug addicts. Like I had a no meth policy in my chapter, but we wanted to be brothers. So if someone was using, we'd try and get them into rehab or whatever. And the two guys that were informants, I took personally to rehab several times. One of them supposedly tried to kill himself or whatever, who was sitting next to him in his hospital bed. Like I was always trying to be a best brother, and this guy's getting paid $4,000 a month to tell on us. And since we weren't doing stuff, they were just making shit up.
Well, they were getting paid?
Yeah, dude. One was a federal informant and the other was a state, but they're both getting paid between $3,000 and $4,000 a month. And they got to justify a paycheck, which, that's a whole different rabbit hole, but we both know, right? And so, I would watch them instigate stuff or start stuff. Or one of them, we had a member, he did 15 years in prison, got out, prospected, joined. And this informant wanted to borrow money, so we loaned him some money. And he said, hey, I don't feel comfortable just owing you money without collateral, just hang on to this pistol. And he's like, man, I'm a felon, and the informant was too. And so he didn't want anything to do with it. He goes, man, I just feel better if you hang on to this pistol. So he's trying to be a good brother, hangs on a pistol. Boom, felon in possession, firearm, armed career criminal, 15 years. For like, and something that it wasn't out, it's not like he caught a guy selling guns, you know what I mean? And that's what I saw in Black Rain, that they would find these guys down and out, maybe between jobs, young kids. And hey, one of them was, I got a box of untaxed cigarettes. Go flip them, sell them to your friends, and give me half the money. Well, man, most younger kids don't know that's a big federal offense. People don't understand that, and they need some cash. Did you bust a guy that was out doing illegal activity? No, you instigated it, right? Or hey, the guy in between jobs, hey, go drop this envelope off somewhere. Sure, you might know it's something nefarious, but you're not a major drug dealer. You're trying to make some money. And I saw them do that stuff time and time again. And in fact, one of the undercovers I had met, he was a hang-around. So he was that guy that was like trying to join the club, kick it with the club. And I met him in Colorado at this big swap meet. And I only remember because it stuck out to me that he didn't look like a club guy. He kind of looked like a surfer. He was older. Didn't have the same vibe as everyone else. But, I was brand new to club life. So it just kind of clicked, but I didn't think much of it. A year or so later, I'm in San Diego at a big Mongol run. And he's there and he's wearing a patch. So he had joined. And so, hey, what's up, man? Good to see you again. And he goes, hey, let's go talk outside. Well, Mongols aren't allowed to fight each other. But still, when a man says, let's go outside, and I don't know him, right? I'm like, okay, this is weird. So I go outside, and he says, hey, I'm going to be visiting Oregon soon. And I go, oh, cool. Where are you going to be? What do you need? And he said, well, either Portland or Eugene. Well, if you're familiar with Oregon, these are about 100 miles apart. It just happened to be where we had two chapters. Kind of weird that you're going to go out of state, not quite know where you're going to go, but probably somewhere where the chapters, right? So first red flag. And then I said, well, yeah, anything you need, let me know when you're out there. And what I mean by that was, hey, you need lunch, a ride to the airport, brotherly stuff, right? And he goes, no, man, I got this big deal going on. And mind you, this is a stranger. And he goes, and I need some guys to carry guns and, watch my back. And I said, nah, man, we're good. I start walking off, and he goes, bro, I'm talking kilos. I think he said something like he wanted to pay the guys $2,000 a piece. He wanted 4 guys, and he goes, and I'll give you the $8,000 right now. Pretty huge red flags, right? Even as a new, naive kid. So I go up to my chapter president and said, hey, I think that dude's a cop. We tell our national. Turned out, though, he had been doing this, and he got guys wrapped up into it. And the craziest part is, what had happened is he might ask me and you to do it, say we say yes. We're standing in some hotel room while an undercover agent is selling fake drugs to an undercover DEA agent. So no crime's really being committed. But then they charge you and I with carrying a firearm in commission of a drug deal, and, a litany of charges for this made-up street theater. And they caught numerous people doing that. And because they hit them with racketeering, it's a pretty big risk to fight it, right? You're going to go sit in front of a jury and say, oh, I was just trying to back up my friend, right? Pretty big risk. And so I saw that stuff time and time again, and it made me really lose faith in, like, that whole justice system and, these undercover cops that... I know I'm on a tangent, but, ideally... No,
you're doing great.
Ideally, these guys' jobs for what people like us that knew as kids is they got into these dangerous groups and they saw what was going on and they busted them. If that was all well and good, that's the game, right? But they don't. They get in there and they instigate and create and start stuff, and that's the craziest part for me is seeing all, because I saw it firsthand.
Now, can any type of motorcycle club tell when there's a fake or a fraud or an undercover among them? Is it easy or is it hard?
I think it's hard now because, the feds have everything at their disposal as far as backstop. So for me, like, I would never say I recruited for the Mongols because I would never ask anyone to join my club. But what I did do is trying to have a good public persona. We'd out have fun, and which would attract like-minded people. So a lot of people would see what we're doing and want to join or start a chapter. And whenever I did that, you want to know who you're bringing in. And it wasn't like, oh, I can't let cops in because I'm doing illegal stuff. But we don't allow law enforcement, and you don't want someone that's going to create drama or issues. And in smaller towns, like say I grew up in Oregon. So if I met you and you were from Oregon, I could figure out where you're from pretty quick and who you know. And so there's no faking that, right? So I think part of that is when clubs started rushing to get more members and stuff, I think some of that got overlooked. Or, oh, this guy moved from somewhere, and the world's really not that big. And you could usually find someone that knows people. So I think that's probably the most challenging part. And then the other red flags where I'm telling you, man, they just blatantly want to commit crimes. And for me, I don't know what it was like in your life, but anyone that was doing illegal stuff usually didn't go and tell a stranger about it and ask him to do it with them, So those are generally the pretty big red flags.
Yeah, wow. So a guy like that, how I was just describing, that ATF agent, the stories he's telling, that's not like current Mongol activity or any type of motorcycle club. And I think that's where a big stereotype is when you hear these stories, because that compares to what you see on TV, but that's not active right now. And maybe it is in some parts, but not for the majority. Yeah,
and every club's different, so I can't speak on behalf of the Hells Angels. I can say when I joined the Mongols in 07 and 08, they made a rule that everyone had to have visible means income, full-time job, because they wanted people to stop dealing drugs. Because, if we're in the same chapter and you're dealing drugs and you get caught, it makes me look bad. It affects everybody. But, these undercover guys, first of all, we got to look at the source, right? Second of all, they want to tell you how dangerous it was for them, all this illegal stuff. Because what are they going to sit here and tell the truth? Hey, dude, we did some cocaine and had sex with chicks and rode motorcycles a lot. Like, everybody like, oh, wow, cool. Sounds pretty fun, right? But they have to spin it their way. And, like I said, I've read all those books. And so all these informants talking about, their life was on the line. But these guys are these major criminals. They have to stop. And no one's going to believe the truth because who wants to? And so I think that plays a big role. And again, I wasn't in the Hells Angels, so maybe some of his stuff seems true. But from what I've seen of not just him, but guys like him, is a lot of times that stuff comes up in trial, and the things they're saying, don't have credibility.
Now, you mentioned earlier that one Mongol couldn't fight another. How would you guys handle, say, a discrepancy among you two?
So the thought was there's nothing two brothers can't sit down and talk about, which I liked a lot because, the more you hear about, mob stuff and gang stuff and club stuff, the one thing that always kept me away from that was the infighting. I want to be comfortable around my friends or my brothers. I don't want to go on this big party. I wonder if I'm going to come back, right? And so that really attracted me to the Mongols. Everyone's a grown man at the end of the day. So if I walked up to a Mongol in front of a bunch of people and called him a bitch or a pussy, I'm probably going to get punched in the mouth. But other than that, the whole goal was we'd sit down and talk about it. If there's an issue, sit down like men and discuss it. Don't talk to other people. Don't go behind their back. Sit down. And leadership played a big role in it too, is cutting it off when it started. Sit down and deal with it and move on. And so, just that forced interaction, that talking to each other and being brotherly, I think played a big role in that and helped out a lot.
Yeah, I've known of some local clubs that they would settle beef by fighting each other, like in a circle, and they bang it out until it's resolved. And so I guess that's very different in the Mongols.
Yeah, and so I grew up in a traditional skinhead scene, so like anti-racist skinhead gang, and it was the same. Like, hey, if there was some sort of discipline to be found out, you go in the backyard and you're banging it out, or someone's mad at you or whatever, you fight it out. And I saw firsthand that it didn't work. Everyone says, sure, help you up and we'll have a beer and be like, oh, good one. But resentment's a major thing, dude. And, there's too many little things that could happen. Oh, that wasn't fair. I wasn't looking, or, whatever. And guess what happens one day when you all of a sudden that guy needs you for help or you need him? You might be a little late to show up or, little things, but it causes resentment and creates a lot of issues. And so we just wanted to cut that off before it happened. And I think it says a lot, too, about the brotherhood, like something that we can sit down and talk about. Because those situations you're talking about, it doesn't take long for a tough guy to be in a position of power just because people are scared to challenge him because he can beat you up. And then does that really mean he's the best guy for the job? Is that the guy we should be following just because he's a good fighter? So I think there's a lot of inherent issues with that type of mentality.
Do you guys consider it like tattletaling if one member reports it to leadership, or does leadership want to be left out of it, or how does that work?
That's a slippery slope for sure, right? Like, say you've got a chapter president that's being a dictator and kind of bullying everyone. Well, who's going to be the guy that goes tells mother chapter about it, right? Like, that's rat behavior. Mother chapter would obviously want to know. But I think the other part, too, is these things, it's hard for these things to happen if we're all spending time with each other, hanging out, being as active as we're supposed to, because then we'll just see it. So like, say that chapter was never attending events and they were doing their own thing. Mother chapter, someone would probably come and sit down and see, well, why aren't they active? Why aren't they showing up? And those things usually come to the surface. So I think, it's good to kind of build that environment of that this isn't okay, but not that it's okay to go tell on someone for doing it either. Like at the end of the day, be a man, right? If you don't like how this guy's talking to you or you think he's being a dictator, follow the proper chain of command, stand up in church and say something about it, have a voice. And at some point, the truth's going to come to the surface, no matter what.
Now, did you guys have like a list of principles that you had to memorize and maybe even recite and follow strictly in your life?
Yeah, so motorcycle clubs are crazy strict, and especially the Mongols, they were like militantly strict. And that was something that I was known well for in my leadership position is I really liked the structure. So we had a lot of rules. So there was the commandments, which were essentially how everyone should live their life. Don't steal from a brother. Don't mess around with a brother's old lady. Don't ever cause a brother to get arrested. Those types of things. Don't tell on a brother. The types of stuff that I feel like is just man shit anyways. And then there's a constitution, which are the rules for everyone in the club. And then each chapter has their own specific bylaws. So, I mean, there's like 3 different levels of rules, right, that everyone had to follow. But most of it was like I said, stuff that you would expect anyways. When it came down to chapter stuff, it was more of that like, let's stop things before they get bigger. So, don't talk bad about a brother behind his back. Whatever you would say about someone, you should say it to their face. But all the types of things that I think, are traits that people should have anyways, it's just enforced.
Is there like a physical like handbook or leadership book that someone carries around with them?
Yeah, the secretary treasurer carries the constitution has the chapter's bylaws, the club's constitution, and the commandments. So each chapter's treasury has a copy of it.
And who wrote that? Is that like the initial founder of the Mongols?
So the initial guys created probably the early version, and then anytime it's going to be updated or changed, it has to happen by like an all presidents meeting, so all the leaders. So, every new leadership change and stuff, they make some amendments or things change or, just evolve with time. But it's all the leaders of the whole club get together to do it. So not just one guy can say, hey, we're not doing this anymore or this is going to change. So it's the whole club's voice or opinion, essentially.
Now, when you say leadership, do you mean president or do you mean like vice president? Is that considered in leadership or is it just
that
strictly?
Type of thing? It would be like a president's meeting. So it's all the chapter presidents would get together. But the way the Mongols were kind of structured is each chapter had its own leadership, which I think similar to all clubs, or the secretary treasurer, or sergeant at arms, president. But then I developed a program actually called the regional rep program. So then there would be someone either in the state or in your region, say the Northwest or whatever, that kind of oversaw all the local chapters and then reported back to mother chapters. So kind of a liaison. So not necessarily like a boss position to an extent, but you're making sure that everyone's following the rules and, doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that way, the Mongols Mother Chapter is located in Southern California. And when I first joined, most of the whole club was in California. So, I'm in Oregon, a long way away, really. And when chapters started popping up in other states, it was hard to making sure everyone was on the same page or following the same rules, because maybe there's one guy in Oklahoma that's reporting to Mother Chapter. Well, they're only going to know what he's telling them because it's not like they're out there all the time. They're not active. And we were seeing all this disparity on like the truth versus what's really going on. And so having someone that's been in long enough that can like play that kind of, authoritative role and oversee what's happening in our region played a big role. So then there's that regional rep or state reps, and then the club's mother chapter, which is their initial chapter. And then so that it was the national P, national SARS, that type of stuff.
When you're saying your Mongol leadership, does that put a target on your back with law enforcement?
Absolutely. It's a funny thing to me where people, this day and age, people want that title. I call it like the Jax Teller syndrome, right? They want to have the tab that says president. And I've always thought the people that want the position probably aren't the right people for it, right? The good leaders usually end up there because of their ability to lead. But what people don't understand, what comes with leadership, is that's a huge one. And towards the end of my club career before I retired, people were asking me to run for national president, and I would tell them, I go, sit up here at the next all-members meeting and tell anyone in the crowd, raise your hand if you used to be a national president. I go, it's not going to happen because they're either in prison, dead, or they got ran off due to politics or something, but there's no longevity in that leadership style. So there's so much that comes with it that you got to be a little crazy to even want to do it, to be honest.
Did you ever think about it just with your personality, just to test to see if you could make it to that level, or was it just never an interest?
I never had interest in leadership at all. I feel like the right guy should be doing the job. And like I said, I'm very like strict and structured. And so, say I created a program, I wanted to see it through. Or if I helped start a chapter in that area, I'd have a pretty big say in what they're doing or what's going on. So it was more like oh, I was in charge of that region because I started most of those chapters and I had personal connections with those guys versus like, oh, I want to say that I have this title or that title.
Now, when you were in your leadership position, did you have guys start going out and doing podcasts? Did this world exist back then, or do you think this has all changed recently?
It's all pretty new, man. And most clubs have rules like the active members can't do it. I do know, like before I left the club, there was a guy or two that had done it without asking permission and they got in trouble and, you know, little stuff like that. But no, it definitely wasn't a big thing yet. I think when I joined in 2007, there were some ex-members that the old leader Doc had thrown out. And they had nowhere to, like, air their grievance like they have now, right? And so there was, like, History Channel. Remember, like, Ganglands or any of those types of shows? That's where these ex-members would pop up and talk about club stuff. But now, you know, it's all over YouTube and all over. So I think that's all pretty new.
And then when you leave and when you retire, you're free to do any of that kind of within reason?
So if you retire, and again, I can only speak on behalf of the Mongols because I know everyone's different, but when you retire from the Mongols, you get to like keep your patch. You can still like show up to events and wear your club stuff. And so, you know, you still have to answer to leadership. So no, if you were retired and you'd want to do something like this, you'd have to get some sort of approval. You know, same thing if you're writing a book or whatever, you're supposed to get Mother Chapter's approval. You're supposed to get approval to be on shows. But if you're out or out bad, well, I mean, you're already not following the rules, right? So it is what it is. So it just kind of depends on your situation.
So when you wrote your book, you had to ask permission for that? I
was already out bad by then. So my status got changed out bad. But I will say, so I was in when Junior wrote his book and in when Doc wrote his book. And it was somewhat similar where Doc was in leadership. So he probably thought he could do what he wanted. But he had told everyone he was writing this book. And the club essentially said, well, let us read it first and then we'll decide. And then my biggest thing is the Mongols' biggest commandment is not to profit off your patch, right? And I'm not saying this to talk bad about anyone else, but if I wrote a book and it just said, you know, the life and times of a Mongol, people are going to buy it because it says Mongol, not because they know who Mooch is. And if the club agrees to that or sanctions that, then I would assume you should probably kick some money back to the club because you're profiting off their name and their patch. But some of the people that wrote books didn't do that. And so, you know, their status got changed and maybe it's different now, but I didn't want to do that. So, you know, even if I was out bad or not, I wanted my book to be based off me. Like being a Mongol is a part of my story, but it's not my whole story. And so my title has nothing to do with the Mongols. Obviously, I talk about the club in the book, but that's not my selling point. And so I think when it comes to writing books and stuff, that's always kind of like that weird spot too. Like you can do it respectfully, which will still probably piss people off because you're talking about club life, right? Or you can try and profit off somebody else's name and logo.
So out bad, what does that compare to? Like dishonorably discharged, or is that the reference? I think so. So that is also, everything's changed, right? With time, the motorcycle clubs are getting so big and evolving so much that, you know, things keep changing. Initially, if you left from the club, there was either retired, out in good standings, or out in bad standings. When I'd first joined, if you were in for more than 5 years, you could retire. And then say something like, hey, dude, you just had a kid and maybe you're going through divorce and now you're a single dad. You know, there's a lot of reasons where, okay, now I can't devote all my time to the club. You show up to church, explain it. And, you know, a lot of times we're all supposed to be brothers, right? We'd say, okay, you're right. Your focus should be on this. And we let them leave in good standings. But after those big raids in 2008, we lost a ton of members. And there was other stuff going on too. And they had changed the rule that you had to be in for 10 years before you could retire. And then as people were still quitting, for what I don't remember what even the selling point of this was, but we all voted for it, that if you haven't been in for 10 years and you quit, you're automatically out bad. Well, before, out bad was like you stole from someone or you told on someone or, you know, you violated a major rule. Now we water it down by saying, well, they're out bad, but just because they quit. So it's almost like they were creating different levels of out bad. I know that's not quite the case, but that's like the easiest way to say it, right? There's the guy that, yeah, he's out bad because he stole a bunch of money from the club, but so is this guy. But all he did was he quit before he had his 10 years in. Yeah, it just sounds negative. It's like a negative connotation.
And so when people hear about it, in reality, what it is now is a no contact. So it's not like I get asked all the time, oh, you can leave you can leave motorcycle clubs. And man, in my years, I saw way more people leave than joined. It happens. I mean, if you really think about it, it's like anything else. A lot of younger people join or get excited, and then life happens, right? You go back to school, you have a family, you get a good job. People fizzle out all the time. And people didn't comprehend you can just up and leave. But the other part, too, is I think, you know, if you're on the legal side, you understand, if I force you to stay in something you don't want to be in, how can I trust you to be my brother, right? And so there's a lot of different versions that are, you know, different angles. But the reality now is out bad just mainly means no contact. So like, active members of the Mongols aren't supposed to talk to me or hang out with me, which is a bummer, but it is what it is. But people aren't like actively out trying to beat me up or look for you or that type of stuff.
Did you guys see a lot of people joining and realizing they couldn't keep up with the resume and what it entailed and the policies, and then they would leave?
Absolutely. That was huge, especially younger guys. Or a big one for me would be a guy's going through divorce. He feels like he's got nothing, so he wants to join the club. And normally I wouldn't take those guys because I know what happens. When their life gets back to on track, what do you think the first thing they dump is? Well, now I'm married again, or I've got this good job. So finding that right person at the right time is a big deal. But yeah, it's super common because people either join because they need something, or, they're young and they're naive, or like me, I was just 25 years old riding a motorcycle. I was like, I want to be in a club. I didn't even think long term,
What about women? Can women join?
No. So there's clubs for women, but no women can join the Mongols.
Do you think that'll ever change?
I doubt it, because just like, they also have the rule no African Americans in one of the major 1%er clubs. Now, there are mixed race clubs, and there's other clubs that have them, but, the main old school ones don't. And a lot of it comes down to prison politics is a huge, huge role. But, times change. I think thoughts and stuff are changing. But who wants to be the first club to do it? You think the Mongols want to say, we're the first ones that let a woman in? Like, no, I don't mean to sound chauvinistic, but we know how that's going to go. And this is, a world of alpha males, in a tough culture. No one's going to want to be that guy.
Yeah. I think they are starting to display it more in, like, movies or TV shows. They're bringing in, like, that woman-type biker into it. I wonder if that will have any influence over it.
Yeah, I don't know, because, like, Sons of Anarchy was very female-driven. But in reality, the old ladies usually don't get told a lot about club stuff. And like for years, I didn't even bring mine to club events or stuff like that. It depends too. It is a family. So once they get to know each other, all the old ladies get to know each other, then everyone wants to hang out too. But they're normally left in the dark, just like any other civilian or someone that's not a patch holder is. So like seeing them being more actively involved it would take a specific, like that someone would be going out to try and do that. And again, I don't know which club would want to do that first.
Why do they call it an old lady? I've heard guests refer to their girlfriends or wives as that. And growing up, I never heard that.
It's funny because I really don't know. So I think, it's just an old term like, the old lady, but it's big in the biker scene. Being a social worker, it's funny because I don't like any of that type of stuff. So it's like, it's funny that's like a word that I say because normally I wouldn't choose to say it. But that's just, that's the definition. It's what they use. It's what everyone, it's recognized.
And it's O-L-E or O-L-D?
Yeah, O-L lady.
Just O-L lady.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The old lady.
Now, you had some gang activity from your past. Did that affect you joining the Mongols? Or were they upset about that? Do they allow that?
Yeah, it's definitely allowed. So it's almost like a graduate level, right? Like I spent time doing street gang stuff. And again, I was in like a skinhead punk rock gang, so I wasn't like out selling drugs or anything like that. But, we were in a violent street gang. And then, you get older, you're trying to stay out of trouble, but you still want that like sense of belonging and stuff. So motorcycle club's kind of like that next natural step. And so there's a lot of guys, especially California and stuff, that live that gang life, slowed down, ended up joining a club. So that's super common.
Now, when you go to prison or you go to jail, what are you rocking? Like, are you saying you're with the Mongols or are you saying you're with a street gang? What holds up more weight? That's
probably in theory, you're supposed to always say, I'm here with the Mongols, right? The Mongols are in a difficult position because they're primarily Hispanic with white guys. And so, the Hispanic brothers go in, they have obligations or are supposed to, align with certain sides. For the most part, thankfully, I've avoided prison. But for the most part, at least the guys I know, at least in the feds, there's a lot of bikers in the feds, and they usually just stick together. So, hey, roll with the Mongols, and they go roll with the pagans or outlaws or whoever else is there. But that is a sticky topic. Like it, as you know, that there's a lot of different layers to that one.
Yeah, when I saw in the feds, there's so many. Like you have your cars where it's by state, but then you have within the cars you have different groups. Like you would have a biker, or you would have like the Italians who would be from certain states, but they would kind of be joined together. It's very intricate.
Yeah, and that's from what I saw for the most part is the Mongols rolled with the biker car. And it was less, obviously most of it was still white, but I think where it gets difficult is like the Hispanic members that, especially on the West Coast, that are, get asked to run the specific program. And what are you supposed to say? No, I'm a Mongol. So, I can't speak on that because I thankfully haven't had to deal with it, but I do know that it's a challenge, and it's definitely, there's a lot of politics that go into that.
Now, in just regular county jail, were they separating different bikers, like the groups, if they had, say, like a Hell's Angel and a Mongol in the same facility? Or
I think so, and again, state by state's really different. Like Oregon, man, it was pretty chill. I've done a ton of county time, and you know, it didn't matter like who you roll with or anything. It was chill. Once that. The amount of time I spent there when I was older was because of that crime against cops. And because of that, I was on 23.5-hour day, single cell lockdown anyway. So there was no one to roll with. But then you go say like LA County or somewhere in Southern California, and then it's going to be a different animal too. So it kind of depends on the state.
Why do you think those violations you got with the undercovers reporting that you were associating, why do you think you didn't get a significant amount of time? Because people get, you know, that have felonies can get years for those type of violations.
So I got found not guilty of all the felonies. So I was on misdemeanor probation, but with the gang enhancement stuff, like the non-associations. And so my initial goal was I was on 5 years probation. So the most they could do, and which was what my fingers crossed at the time was, could violate all of them, and I'd have to do that 5 years. But with the jails overcrowding and everything else, I knew, you know, maybe I'd go in there for a year and a half, get kicked out, and go, cool, no more paper. But the judge is onto that too, right? So whenever I violated, she would violate one count at a time. And so it would probably take me 5 years to still go through it. But there's only so much they can do on misdemeanor stuff. So they couldn't add time or anything like that. They could only do it up to how much time I had left on my probation.
Did you have a paid attorney or a public defender?
Yeah, no, I spent a lot of money on an
Do you
attorney.
think that you would have the same outcome if you had a...
Absolutely not, man. There's no way. I mean, you know, I had law enforcement out to get me. I watched them lie on the witness stand. You know, there's this big, it was in the media all the time. I was on the news because it was this, you know, this outlaw motorcycle gang member tries to kidnap cops or force cops off the road. So imagine what the jury thought, right? And no, without a good attorney, I would have been screwed for sure.
Yeah, you don't really hear of many of those cases being able to win.
No, I mean, I'd probably still be sitting there. Plus, I think we also both know from that system is public defenders just want to get you a plea bargain. And so if I'm saying, hey, I'm fighting this, I'm going to trial, I don't think I would have had a very good outcome.
Yeah. What did your parents think about all of this between the gang activity and then joining such a notorious club? What were their thoughts?
Man, not stoked. But I was, you know, I have a very supportive family. So like they're the ones who helped me pay for my attorney. I couldn't have done that without them. My mom and my aunts and uncles were at like every one of my trial. My trial was like a week and a half long. They were at every hearing. So super supportive. I'm sure they wished I wasn't doing it, right? But they were also helpful when they could. And, you know, they started to get to know more of the Mongols, and like at my wedding and place like that, you know, there was obviously club guys there. And so they get to know my mom. So, you know, the more she met people, she saw it wasn't what everyone thinks. And she saw like the, you know, the human side to it. And I wouldn't say she was like amped, but she was supportive of me. So she kind of had to support it, right? When I left, she was very happy.
So do you think her seeing the brotherhood family aspect really helped and changed things?
Absolutely, because I think, you know, coming from our upbringing and family meaning so much, seeing that I always had people with me or anytime I needed help, you know, I was never alone. And so I think she liked seeing that too, you know. If I was hurt somewhere, someone was with me. If I needed a ride, someone was there. So I always had so much support that I think she liked seeing that.
Why did you ultimately decide to leave?
So I was in 15 years. Times changed a lot. Our leadership changed. You know, Little Dave had just gotten thrown out. There was all this like internal power vacuum, essentially. Some people were really pushing for me to run for national president, which, again, I wasn't really going to do, but it also put a target on my back. Some of the new guys that were in leadership weren't a fan of our last leader, and because I was, you know, in the active national leadership, I worked a lot with Little Dave. So I think that kind of put a target on my back. I just started to see like the writing on the wall was part of it. The other part is I was burnt out, man. You know, 15 years, I'd started these chapters. We were really close with another club in Illinois, and that relationship had changed, and I'd been notified by law enforcement there was a contract out on me, which that's happened to me twice. And honestly, not sound dramatic, usually I don't believe that. I think it's like TV hype. I know it happens, but I didn't take it super seriously. But it's an extra level of stress.
What does that mean, a contract out?
Like, this such and such club's trying to kill you, or they're out. Essentially, if law enforcement notifies you, they have to have credible knowledge that it's a real threat, and they're at a duty to warn. And so that's happened to me twice over club years. First time I was like, yeah, this is, because you know what they do after they tell you that is they give you their card and say, if you ever need anything, give us a call. So I was like, oh yeah, that's the feds trying to get me to talk to them. But the last time it was local law enforcement, and that didn't play a role into me quitting, but it was just another layer to it, you know. One of the close members that I'd brought into the club recently was murdered. Another guy that I was friends with in another club just got murdered. This was all like in a couple months. So there's this power vacuum going on. I'm burnt out. Two close friends of mine just get killed. Now I've got law enforcement saying I might get killed. And it just started getting to the point that I was like, man, I didn't align with the morals and values of this new leadership. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think the club seemed happy. And I got to the point of, am I going to be, there's always that generation that are like, back in my day. And I was like, am I turning into that guy? You know, am I selfishly trying to hold on to what's left for me, or is it what's best for the club? And so it really just kind of aligned. It was like, this is a time for me to step away. And so I initially stepped away and retired in good standings because of, I think, some of my political influence, and elections were coming up and stuff like that. They were trying to make it so people couldn't contact me or talk to me because they didn't want my influence. And then my specific chapter, so I started this chapter in Southern Illinois, and there were 6 of us. One of the members had just gotten arrested for beating up a member of the Outlaws, and a member of the Outlaws had cooperated and testified, so he got 5 years suspended sentence. So if any violation, he goes to prison for 5 years, or I think it was 3 years. Yeah, 3 years suspended sentence. And part of his stipulations, too, were no association with the club. So if he got caught hanging out at the club, he'd go to prison for 3 years. What made it difficult was his blood brother was in our chapter, his roommate was in our chapter, and his coworker was in our chapter, and we all did jiu-jitsu together, worked out together. So it was a very tight-knit, small area. And they mainly joined because they had met me. They didn't know a lot of Mongols at the time. They met me. We all were having fun. And then, they traveled. They got to know Mongols. But we had a really tight-knit thing going. So now I'm retired, and now Mike can't be in the chapter. And so the remaining 3 or 4 guys are like, dude, I don't know if we should stick this out, or should we take a step back, and maybe when Mike's off paper, we can come back. So they left. Well, they didn't have their time in to be out in good standings. Typically, in that situation, under different leadership, we probably would have weighed the pros and cons. Do we want to shut down a whole chapter? Should we give them? It made sense why they were leaving, right? But it was a political move, and the guys in Mother Chapter said, hey, we're going to advocate for you that these guys are in good standings, because I was pretty vocal about it. I said, if you put these guys out bad, that means, because if you're out bad and I hang out with you, then I'm out bad. And I kind of knew that was going to be the play, right? So I said, if you guys put them out bad, I live in this tiny town. These are like some of my best friends. We train together. It's going to put me out bad. And we're going to advocate that we don't. But they did. They put them out bad. And they called me and they said, hey, you're still in good standings, but if you get caught hanging out with these guys, you're out bad too. And just being the man I am, I just said it right over the phone, like, hey, all due respect, guys, like, these are my friends, and I'm going to keep hanging out with them. And they said, well, then you're out bad too. So they sent a message out that just said, Mooch has moved on with his life. He's no longer a member, but he's out in bad standings. Which is kind of a contradictory text, but that's what happened.
What is it, like a group text?
Yeah, like a group thread.
Everyone,
yeah.
To everyone in the country, all the Mongols?
Yep.
Wow.
That said, hey, Mooch is no longer a member, which normally would have left it that, right? Mooch is no longer a member. He's moved on with his life. But I was out bad. So then they had to say that in there too. And so that's when things kind of changed, like who could talk to me, who can't talk to me. But it also opened up the doors for me to do stuff like this, to write my book. I mean, there was a lot of positives that I took out of it too.
How'd that make you feel, though, after 15 years of dedicating yourself to an organization?
It was rough, man. It was rough. And the hardest part too is, and this is pretty natural, but anytime there's leadership changes, programs change, things change, whatever things were put into place. And like I said, I'd started that state rep program and started there was a Mongols have a support club called the Raiders, which had already existed. But I had built the program up so that other states could have it. And now there's Raiders in Thailand and Australia. And so it was something I played a big role in. And so seeing things that I was helped start get changed or like pushed to the side, or like that state rep program that I started, all of a sudden a guy from LA is overseeing Tennessee, and a guy from Southern California is overseeing Missouri, and all the stuff that I had changed that went backwards. So that was really hard. The toughest part is human nature is that when I was in a position of leadership, I thought I had a lot of friends. And when I wasn't, it wasn't necessarily that I was even bummed they weren't talking to me. It was people that started talking shit, right? Like, I ran a tight program, and when they got the accolades for it, everyone was proud to say, oh, yeah, I was in the Mooch program, or, oh, yeah, we're from Oregon. And now those same guys are like, oh, yeah, he didn't know what he was doing, and F that. And that's the part that sucks, And that's just more, I guess, blow to the ego. I don't know. Because I would like to think I don't have a big ego. And it's not that I want any pats on the back for stuff I did in the club life, but I wasn't that guy that like, hey, I quit and I want to see it all burn down. I want to see it still do well. I want to see those chapters I help still grow and do well, and to not have that, like, at least small level of acknowledgement, like, oh yeah, he's that bad, we won't talk to him, but to not talk shit because they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for me, that's the hard part.
Yeah. How did your wife and her family treat you when they first found out that you're in a motorcycle club and your past?
So my wife's mom is amazing, and I think she saw how I treated her daughter, and she got to know me on a good level and really supported me. But I'm sure initially wasn't stoked, right? My wife is a bartender, or was a bartender. Now she has her master's degree in dietetics and nutrition. But at the time, she was a bartender, and that's how we met. She's 10 years younger than me, so I'm sure her family was like, what is she doing hanging out with this older biker? But similar to like the situation with my mom, when she got to actually get to know the guys and see how tight we all were and kind of see the positives to it, she was supportive for sure.
Yeah, because there is a stigma in America, specifically from a woman's side with the family when, the woman, their daughter is with someone that's been incarcerated or is involved in criminal activities. So, sometimes the family kind of pushes who that person is deep down, their character aside, because they're looking at just the outside.
Absolutely, and especially with club stuff, because we hear the age-old stories that, oh, they're getting abused or they're getting turned out or they have to sleep with all the members, and none of these things are true, but that's what popular culture has told us about motorcycle clubs for so long. So I think the trick was really getting to know us and seeing it and kind of seeing that how I treated her daughter and how happy her daughter was, and even for my wife, being around and meeting the guys and meeting the guys' wives and really starting to see like the family vibe of it.
What did you start to do with your life post the Mongols? I know you wrote a book, if you want to tell the audience a little bit about that and where they could find that. And then I also love for you to tell the audience about what you do now and how your past experience involved, with getting into trouble and in the motorcycle club in general helps you in your current role.
Yeah, so at first it was a little tough. I went from dedicating 95% of my life to something. For most of my adult life, I was dedicated to this motorcycle club and actively working on or doing something. And so that downtime was tough for a minute. So I tried to replace it with positive things. So like my jiu-jitsu team played a huge role in helping me move forward. I felt like I still had brothers and family because it was guys I was training with, I was close with. I started a group called Lift, Train, Ride, which isn't a motorcycle club. It's just kind of a lifestyle. It was a lot of the ex-members. We work out together 3 or 4 days a week. We do jiu-jitsu or some sort of martial art together. And then every month we plan a big group ride. And once a year we do like a long ride. So I'm kind of the positives of club life without any of the BS and the drama. So that kind of helped. I started that. I started a podcast called Mondays with Mooch, where I get on there and just kind of tell my story and interview people and I talk about club stuff, and sometimes I answer viewer questions about like, what's it like to prospect, or, the random things we see that people ask about. But the biggest thing is I wrote a book called The Ride of My Life, and it's exactly that. It's my story from growing up with my family to being in a punk rock band and touring the country to getting into motorcycles. And then it ends with me getting my master's degree in social work and with what I do now. And I think that's the piece that's been super rewarding and cool is what I do now is I work with teenagers that are at risk of being placed outside of the home or into detention. They all have antisocial, behaviors that's getting them in trouble essentially. And I go into the home and I work with them and their parents, primarily the parents, and we try and teach these different skills that the big thing with the social work system right now is people come in and do something for you and then they leave. And then these people get dependent on the system. And with what we do is we teach the caregivers these skills so that when we're no longer in the home, they could still replicate them. And a lot of it is parenting stuff, increasing supervision and consequences and rewards and, just a lot of things that are missing, in hopes that we can get these kids that are young teenagers out of trouble and get them on the right track before it's too late, before they are someone like me that had that felony that stuck with them almost their whole life, and try and get in and intervene before these things happen. So that's where a lot of my focus is now. Were
you looked at weird while going through school? Were your colleagues looking at you in a different way or maybe even treating you differently?
Absolutely. So like I said, I think I was 28 or 29 when I went back. I had Mongols tattooed huge on the back of my head. I went to small liberal arts colleges. So I was at Whittier College. It was a bunch of like 18 and 19-year-old kids that just graduated high school living in the dorms. And then even when I went back, I did Willamette, and then I graduated from George Fox back in Oregon. And so, yeah, I mean, some of the cases, once I got into my mid-30s and stuff, I was the same age as the professors, But I also think the field I chose was social work, and I think people are really starting to recognize that who better to work in this field than someone that understands it, right? Like, if I go and sit down with a family that's navigating the legal system, I don't have to tell them my story, but they know I understand it. And I think that plays a huge role, that, you know, they know that I'm there going through this with them versus telling what it should be like and have no idea. And that same thing when I go into this field with the felony, with all these tattoos, I was like, how am I going to get a job? But I've used it as a strength. Like, most of therapy is about the therapeutic rapport. And I walk in and meet these teenagers, and they already know they're not going to get away with shit. They're not going to BS me, right? And I don't have to tell them my story. It's not relevant. But they could read me and know that at least I can understand or comprehend what they're going through. So I think that's all been super positive and played a big role. I did sue the state of Oregon during my internship. So second internship I got offered was to be a counselor at the juvenile detention center, the Oregon Youth Authority. And I had to do some training, and then I was going to start. I'm super excited because that's the population I want to work with. And they give me an address to, like, well, here's the training. I'm oblivious. Drive to this training, look at the address, get there. It's the Oregon State Police Academy, right? So I'm sitting in this parking lot. Every, county, state, everyone's there training, all their new hires. And I text my wife, and I was like, this is not going to go well. You know, I'm like, I'm a little cocky, but I was like, maybe I'm being too over. Like, most probably don't know who I am here. In reality, they were probably teaching a class about me somewhere in there, because I was halfway through the day, I got pulled out, fired immediately. They had this big grand scheme. I was like undercover, so that, you know, like trying to recruit kids from the prison to join my gang. Kids that don't have motorcycles that are 60. I mean, ridiculous, right? They think I spent 8 years of my life and $150,000 in student loans so I can recruit kids from a juvenile detention center, right? But they openly said they fired me for being a Mongol. And my school supported me, which was really cool. George Fox University, it was awesome. And then I got an attorney, and I sued them for discrimination and wrongful termination, and I won. They settled out of court.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was
That's
cool.
so cool.
And it was, you know, it was an internship, so it was like, I think I won $1,001 or something. There was no monetary value in it. But the point was, you can't fire someone for being involved in a motorcycle club when you're trying to do something positive.
Yeah.
And so again, I, you know, hopefully left some sort of lasting impression, or, you know, something that helped positive for people moving forward if they're either in clubs or getting out of clubs or have that stigma and they're wanting to get into a helping profession. Hopefully that at least eased the burden a little bit.
Well, you could change. Anyone can change their life at any point. Even individuals serving life in prison, they have the ability to make those changes even within those prison walls to better themselves in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
we all have an opportunity to do that.
And that's my argument with these tags, you know, felon or whatever. Like, you go and you do your time, and a lot of these people go through, you know, countless different treatments and all this different stuff to be rehabilitated, and then they have to carry this tag with them the rest of their life. You know, I was grateful enough that last year, or early this year, I finally got my felony expunged since after 1999.
Wow.
So
congratulations!
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I mean, I've had it my whole life, right? So all of a sudden I have gun rights again and stuff. I'm like, this feels wrong. I feel like I'm doing something wrong.
Wow.
But, you know, not everyone has that opportunity, and it's so crazy and sad to see people, especially young kids. Like I said, I got mine at 18. See young kids make this mistake, and then they have to live with that the rest of their life.
Yeah, I got mine at 19. And, you know, unless a president pardons me because it's federal,
Yeah.
like, I'm kind of stuck. I'm thankful and lucky that it hasn't affected me at all. Obviously, I get the weird looks and the nose and this and that, but in my line of work, you know, that's my superpower, like yours, which is why I love what you do. And you told me, because that's similar to what I'm doing on the side now, helping kids. And the lived experience helps you break the barrier with them. Because
100%.
when they find out I went to prison and I was in their shoes, then they automatically open up, rather than an adult that's never been in that position before.
Absolutely. And like I say, even if you don't even have to tell your story, they know the way you carry yourself, or you know what they're talking about, or there's things everyone picks up on, right? Where, like, this guy gets it. He understands.
Yeah.
And so it's cool that you can do that, man. It's very cool.
Has your view on therapy changed ever since, you know, being maybe someone that was like an 18-year-old in the gangs and whatnot to now? Because there was always that stigma about men in therapy. I'm curious your thoughts.
I think culturally it's changed too, right? Like, it's not like back then you didn't tell people you were going to therapy. If your parents were, they would hide it, you know. And I was court-ordered therapy when I was a teenager.
Me too, yeah.
And, you know, I remember it was some guy in a sweater vest that had no idea what he was talking about, trying to talk to me about the violence in my life. And I just remember thinking, like, what does this guy think he knows? So it's nice seeing the other side, right? Like, knowing what I didn't like about it and what I can try and change, and then not being that guy, right? Like, being the guy that does have some empathy and does understand. And I think it's also more popular, or at least it's more mainstream for people to actually give therapy a chance. I think the funny thing about especially being a 1%er in this motorcycle club is it's all alpha males but their president was a therapist. So we'd be sitting in church or meetings, and I'd be like, so how do you feel about that, man? And like, you know, we'd all be sitting there talking about our feelings at these big tough guy meetings. But I think that's becoming more mainstream, thankfully. As a therapist, I have to see a therapist in order to keep your licensing and stuff like that. And so I think culturally they're making a positive shift in that direction. But yeah, it's definitely different than from when we were younger.
That's so awesome. I mean, yeah, it's definitely shifting. I'm able to interview like former murderers or crazy stories and crimes, and I ask them like about their childhood and how they're feeling, and they're willing to open up about it because it's becoming more and more common. For sure.
And that's when we're starting to see, we talked a little off air, but we're starting to see the studies are showing like how much your upbringing played a role in that, or your parenting, or just, your childhood, right? And so hearing these people's past plays a huge role in how we can help them moving forward.
If you could go back in time to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell them?
Man, that's a tough one because really I'm not a guy that has regrets. I think the mistakes I've made shaped me to who I am. I would love to say that I wouldn't have gotten that felony, but you know what? Maybe then my life might have went in a different direction, or some of those doors that got closed to me early were open, shifted the whole way I did things. So just stay true to myself, man. I think it's the biggest thing. That young me was really concerned about my reputation, being known as a tough guy. And I tell this as, it's an exaggeration, but I tell this as like, I was that guy would drive 2 states over if someone called me a pussy. You know what I mean? And I learned as an adult that none of that matters to me at all, dude. First of all, you're not changing anyone's mind. Even if I got over there and beat that guy up, he wasn't looking, he wasn't ready, whatever. Everyone's got an excuse. But what I want to be known for now is just a good person. I want to have that impression and that legacy on people where they go, hey, man, Mooch was a good dude. And that's way more important to me than Mooch was a tough dude. And I think that's probably the biggest change from like young me to now.
That's awesome. Well, Mooch, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today. Thank you to Sos the Ghost. Check out his channel if you guys haven't already. And Sos was on this show a couple months ago, and it's been a pleasure connecting, talking. If you need anything at all, please reach out, and we'll have a link to your book in the description of this episode.
Yeah, thanks so much. And anybody listening, I respond to anyone who hits me up on Instagram. So if anyone needs to talk or have questions, hit me up. It's OG__Mooch. And then please definitely check out my book.
Yeah, he responded to a little white nerdy kid named McLovin, so anything's possible.
For sure.
Well, safe travels back, man.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me on.